Mary Mazzio, you directed the documentary A Most Beautiful Thing, which is about a groundbreaking Black high school rowing team in Chicago. How were you introduced to this story that made you want to make a film of it?
So I've been kicking around the sport of rowing. I was an Olympic athlete in the sport of rowing. And somebody said to me, hey, there's a fellow from the west side of Chicago that self-published a memoir about being part of the first African-American rowing team in the US from the west side of Chicago. And I remember thinking, hashtag that's fake news, right? And I find his book on Amazon, I read it in a nanosecond and tweet out to Arshay Cooper, at Arshay Cooper, compelling read. Well, it tweet rockets back at me like literally within 15 minutes, and my phone rang a half an hour later, and it was Arshay Cooper. And what I didn't realize at the time, which is hilarious, is that he was tweeting to Martin Scorsese, he was tweeting to Will Smith, he was tweeting to Ava, he was tweeting to, Tom Hanks, and he said to me, you know what, Mary, you're the only one that picked up the phone and answered my call. And honestly, Daniel, how lucky am I? I mean, the impact that this project is having is, mind-bending, honestly.
And you shoot these rowing sequences with these team members, and it's very have these aerial shots. They're very cinematic. Like, what was it like shooting those scenes? Like, and how challenging was that?
You know what? We well, when a drone goes in the water, like that's never a good thing. But honestly, we there's so few films that showcase rowing. And honestly, it's not a rowing film, right? It's masquerading as a sports film, but it's a true investigation and really amplification of young men from the west side of Chicago and their reality and all of the systemic obstacles that these young people face at such an early age. But I'll tell you, we, being a rower and seeing so many films that really never got it right. I think The Social Network was probably the only film I've seen, right, that really nailed the sport. And even then, if you're a rower, you can actually see some of the mishaps, right? And so for me, I thought this was an articulation of everything that Arshay Cooper was talking about, the peace, the serenity. Time was slowing down on the water, and that allowed him and the young people that he was with to reimagine who and what they could become.
And the way you structure the film, you're telling us you're meeting these men in the present day, and you're also telling their story of their history when they were on this rowing team in the late '90s, and interspersing it with moments where you really zero in on each individual story and what challenges they face. How did you come up with that kind of that narrative structure, as a way to frame this story?
So great question. And that, therein lies the rub, right? How do you tell the story of past and present, and how do you ground it? And what is the path? And so we chose a path that could also not just showcase these young men, but the testimony of their mothers. And I think at the end of the day, the film stands for the simple proposition that talent is everywhere. Talent is equally distributed. It's access and opportunity that are not. And how do you weave that story into both a retrospective? And I'll tell you, Daniel, I thought this was only going to be a retrospective. And maybe at the end of the film, we'd get the guys on the water at the very end, kumbaya, everybody sings, fade to black. Well, I was on a journey that I had no idea where I would go. Every time, the planet of Arshay Cooper is one where the most extraordinary things happen. People come together that never should be together. And so the first thing Arshay did, in the wake of the death of one of their coaches, we all went to the memorial service. I actually knew this coach back in the day. I had no idea that he had helped to start this team. He was kind of microaggression is like kind, right? He was like a walking effing incident, right? And the guys were there. I was there. And the guy said to me, Arshay said to me, Mary, we've been thinking, And I said, what have you been thinking? And they said, we really need to get back in the boat. And the hair on the back of my head it started going up, and each person had a profoundly different reason for getting back in the boat. Arshay Cooper wanted to show that this very homogenous white sport needed the urgency to diversify. Malcolm wanted to show his son, who was flirting with the kind of activity that Malcolm grew up with, right? That there was a different way. Alvin, who was previously incarcerated, wanted to celebrate the fact that he was past the age of 18 and still alive. And so everyone had an amazing reason. And so thus began a story in real time. And then Arshay Cooper calls me up after some really challenging interviews, very sensitive interviews with their mothers. And what teased out during those interviews was this concept, not just of trauma that these young people, 8, 9, 10, and 11, are experiencing on a daily basis, the profound lack of inequality of safety, profound, that pervades these neighborhoods, that's frankly undemocratic, but couple that with what these mothers were talking about around intergenerational nature of trauma. And what does that look like? And how does that display itself? And after these interviews, Arshay called me, and we were also, of course, talking about toxicity with law enforcement and police brutality. And Arshay called me and said, Mary, I've been thinking, we need to begin a dialogue with the Chicago Police Department. My family continues to live there. They're at risk. And so again, this moment, I'm thinking, okay, where are we going? Hold on. And Arshay invited several cops from the Chicago Police Department to join him and the team in the indoor rowing tanks. And I'm thinking, okay, this might be a one-time thing. They come together. It is very awkward. It's very quiet. And I'm thinking, ooh, I don't know where this is going to go. And then they started getting on the rowing machines. And Alvin, who, by the way, is just off of parole, one of the cops says, okay, Alvin, I'm ready to cheer you on. And kind of gives him a noogie on the top of the head. And I'm like, oh, this could go bad so badly, so quickly. And Alvin looks up and bursts into laughter. And I'm thinking, here you have probably the tallest, gangliest, whitest Chicago cops. And I cried that day 3 times behind the camera. This is the power of Arshay Cooper. And that moment turned into, after the session, Arshay wheels around and says to the cops, do you want to start training with us? Do you want to go on the water with us? And honestly, the guys were like, what did Arshay just do? Right? And to see them train and begin a dialogue was not just profound, and it wasn't just profound when the film came out, but what was amazing was in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, Arshay texted these cops, and they're all in a group chat saying, how are you going to make this stop? And the dialogue that came back, one of the cops posted Black Lives Matter, which you don't see very often, right? And so, Arshay's point, as he said to me, was, look, we have to start somewhere. I'm going to start one cop at a time. And I think, honestly, the courage and leadership that Arshay and these other young men have shown, they reached out to law enforcement. They taught these novice, cops how to row. And you saw hands on hands, shoulders on shoulders. And these officers saw another side of these young men that they frankly had never seen.
This isn't the first film you've made about people from underprivileged communities excelling against the odds, like Underwater Dreams, The Apple Pushers. Is this sort of like a recurring theme that really drives you, or that you find yourself especially inspired by?
Yes, and I'll have to say, in this project, and Arshay has reminded, I come from extraordinary privilege. I didn't come from any money, but I came from extraordinary privilege. And this film, as so many of my other ones, have been a reminder that I didn't claw my way up. I didn't pull myself up by the bootstraps. I may have never seen the inside of a college. My mother was on food stamps, but for the color of my skin and all of the small kindnesses that I was bestowed along the way, right? Small kindnesses and great gifts that I know for a fact would not have been granted to me had my skin been a different color, period, full stop. And so when I began, the reason I became a filmmaker, I was a lawyer. And I was going to court, representing indigent tenants. And every day it was like the same story, a different face. And I'm like, what the F am I doing? Like, yes, I'm helping a family here and there, but this is intractable. What I'm doing is not scalable. And so I feel so privileged and honored by the fact that I'm often invited into these communities. And I think for me as a person, given the privilege, it is incumbent upon me to bring my skill set to amplify somebody else's story, amplify their experience. And it's not my perception of their reality. It is their voice, and I need to get the F out of the way. And I think that's, we're seeing extraordinary activity around this film. Including, after The Hollywood Reporter came out, just this barrage of activity around a feature film. We're seeing Olympic teams across the world. We're seeing, HBCUs and the Obama Foundation and schools and colleges across the country activate in ways that honestly have blown Arshay and I away. And what's most profound has been now corporate CEOs. We're invited into the likes of Vanguard, JP Morgan, Fidelity, you name it, around this idea, not just about lack of access and opportunity, but what is the obligation and role of privilege? And to play a role in this, honestly, has been so exciting. And if you think about who has the levers of power in this country, predominantly white men, predominantly men who went to prep school or HBS or Harvard, Yale, Princeton, many of those men have held an oar, the most privileged, exclusive sport on the planet. And to see Arshay being embraced by this community of stakeholders, I can't tell you the number of people that have said to me, I understand the events of the past 12 months after seeing Arshay's film, not my film, right? After seeing Arshay's film, I get it. We're seeing philanthropy in the wake of this. We're seeing legislative initiatives in the wake of this. And so the film has raised more than $1 million to support Arshay's work already. I mean, this is crazy, right? And part of it is, this is Arshay's story, and I've been lucky enough to be along for the ride.
Well, congratulations on the film, and thank you so much for talking to me about it. And we will bring you back in a little bit to talk with everybody.
All right. Thank you so much, Daniel. We'll see you in a few minutes.
Yep.